Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the hegemony dreadnought, crushing fist. His 4 eyes focused on the blue-green world spinning slowly below. Earth. Such an insignificant little planet, barely worth the fuel it took to reach this backwater system. Yet here they were, the full might of the hegemony's 3rd fleet, hanging in space above a world that refused to submit. The humans had rejected the hegemony's generous offer of vassalage. Twice. They had destroyed the tribute collection ships. They had even had the audacity to demand that hegemony forces leave their system entirely. The Council of Hierarchs was not amused. "Status report," Kethvar growled, his voice carrying the authority of 6 centuries of conquest. "All ships in position, Admiral," replied his tactical officer, a younger hegemony male whose scales still showed the bright patterns of inexperience. 73 capital ships, 400 escort vessels, and the full complement of atmospheric assault craft. The humans have withdrawn most of their fleet beyond the 4th planet. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The humans were already showing their cowardice. Their pathetic collection of primitive warships had fled rather than face the hegemony's superior forces. It would make today's demonstration all the more effective. And the target city? New Geneva, Admiral. Population approximately 8 million. The humans call it a neutral zone, where they conduct their diplomatic functions. Our intelligence suggests it houses representatives from most of their primitive nation-states. Perfect. Kethvar had chosen New Geneva specifically because of its symbolic importance. When the hegemony reduced it to glowing ash in front of the entire galaxy, every species in known space would understand the price of defying their rule. The broadcast would be transmitted on every frequency, sent to every civilized world. The humans would learn their place, and other upstart species would think twice before following Earth's example. Begin the descent. I want every moment recorded in perfect detail. The galaxy must see what happens to those who refuse the hegemony's generous protection. The massive fleet moved with practiced precision. Destroyer squadrons formed defensive perimeters, while heavy cruisers established orbital bombardment positions. The atmospheric assault craft launched from carrier decks, their sleek forms cutting through the thin upper atmosphere like silver knives. Kethvar watched the tactical displays with growing satisfaction. The humans had made no move to intercept the assault force. Their orbital defenses remained silent. A few civilian transport ships fled the target zone, but no military response materialized. The humans were paralyzed by fear, just as intelligence had predicted. On the planet below, emergency broadcasts filled the airwaves as New Geneva's population began evacuating. But 8 million people could not simply vanish, especially not with only 3 hours' warning. The hegemony had timed this perfectly. There would be witnesses, there would be survivors to spread the tale, and there would be enough death to make the lesson unforgettable. Admiral, we're receiving communication requests from 17 different human authorities, the communications officer reported. They're offering to negotiate, to discuss terms. Ignore them, Kethvar snapped. The time for negotiation ended when they rejected our offers. Today they learn the consequences of their arrogance. The first assault craft entered the lower atmosphere, their energy weapons warming up. Kethvar had chosen his squadron commanders carefully. Veterans all, with centuries of experience in bringing uppity species to heel. They would make this quick and clean, surgical, professional, the perfect demonstration of hegemony superiority. Assault Squadron Alpha, you are cleared for bombardment. Target the governmental district first. Let them watch their symbols of authority burn before we move to the civilian sectors. Acknowledged, Admiral. Beginning bombardment run. On the main screen, the surface of Earth grew larger as the assault craft descended. New Geneva spread out below them like a sprawling organism, its towers and spires gleaming in the afternoon sun. The governmental complex sat at the center of the city like a target painted just for them. The first energy blasts lit up the sky with brilliant blue fire. Ancient buildings that had housed human diplomats for centuries simply ceased to exist, vaporized in microseconds. The assault craft swept over the city in perfect formation, their weapons carving geometric patterns of destruction through the urban landscape. But something was wrong. "Admiral!" The tactical officer's voice carried a note of confusion. "We're detecting anomalous energy readings from the planetary surface." Kethvar's attention snapped to the sensor displays. What he saw there made his blood run cold. Massive energy spikes were erupting across Earth's surface, not just near New Geneva, but on every continent. The readings were unlike anything in the hegemony database. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" "Unknown, sir. The energy patterns don't match any known weapon system. They're everywhere. Every major landmass is lighting up our sensors." On the surface below, the assault on New Geneva continued. But now Kethvar noticed something else. The civilian evacuation was proceeding with military precision. The fleeing humans moved in organized groups, following predetermined routes with an efficiency that spoke of long preparation. This wasn't panic. This was a drill. "Communications. Get me a connection to the human leadership, now." "Sir, we're receiving an incoming transmission from Earth. It's being broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously." "Put it through." The face that appeared on the screen belonged to an elderly human female. Her hair was silver white, and her eyes held the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. She wore a simple black uniform with silver insignia that Kethvar didn't recognize. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces," the human said calmly. "To the hegemony forces currently conducting hostile actions against our world, you have exactly 30 seconds to cease all bombardment and begin immediate withdrawal from our system." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Human, you are in no position to make demands. Your world burns beneath our weapons. Your people die as we speak. You will surrender unconditionally, or we will reduce every city on your pathetic planet to radioactive dust." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "I was hoping you would reconsider. You've made a grave miscalculation, Admiral. You seem to believe that humanity's greatest strength is our compassion. You're about to learn how wrong you are." The transmission cut off, leaving Kethvar staring at a blank screen. 30 seconds had passed. That was when the Earth erupted. The first strike came from Luna, where the human moon base had been dismissed as a minor research station. The massive railgun that emerged from beneath its surface was larger than most hegemony battlecruisers. Its projectile, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, struck the dreadnought Tyrant's Will amidships and simply erased it from existence. The second strike came from the asteroid belt, where what the hegemony had assumed were mining operations revealed themselves as hidden weapons platforms. Kinetic projectiles and energy beams lanced out across millions of kilometers with impossible precision, finding targets among the hegemony fleet with surgical accuracy. The third strike came from Earth itself. The energy readings Kethvar's sensors had detected were magnetic acceleration rails, massive installations built deep beneath the planet's surface and powered by the fusion reactors hidden in every major mountain range. They had been camouflaged so perfectly that the hegemony's intelligence services had completely missed them. The first salvo from Earth's planetary defense grid eliminated 47 hegemony vessels in as many seconds. Ships that had terrorized 100 worlds simply vanished in brilliant flashes of liberated energy. The carefully ordered fleet formation dissolved into chaos as surviving vessels tried desperately to evade weapons that fired faster than their pilots could react. "Evasive maneuvers!" Kethvar bellowed, watching his fleet die around him. "All ships! Emergency jump preparation!" But the humans weren't finished. From the outer system came the Earth fleet. Not the handful of primitive vessels Kethvar's scouts had reported, but hundreds of warships that seemed to materialize from empty space. They had been hiding behind sophisticated stealth systems that made them invisible to hegemony sensors until the moment they chose to strike. The human vessels moved with a coordination that spoke of decades of training. They didn't attack in the chaotic swarms typical of younger species. They struck with the calculated precision of master tacticians, each ship part of a larger whole that adapted and responded to hegemony movements faster than seemed possible. "Admiral, we've lost over half the fleet," the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. "The humans they're not fighting like any species in our database. Their coordination, their technology." The crushing fist shuddered as Earth's defense grid found its range. Kethvar watched his shields fail under the sustained bombardment, watched his ship's armor begin to buckle and flow like water under the incredible energies being directed against it. "How?" he whispered, staring at the tactical display that showed the systematic destruction of the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. "How did a primitive world—" His question was answered by another transmission from Earth. This time, Admiral Chen was joined by others, humans in different uniforms representing what Kethvar realized were separate military organizations working in perfect unity. "You made the classic mistake, Admiral," Chen said calmly. "You assumed that because we haven't been conquering our neighbors, we've been weak. You thought our restraint was cowardice. You believed that because we sought peace, we were incapable of war." Another human stepped forward, a dark-skinned man whose uniform bore the insignia of what looked like a special operations commander. "What you failed to understand is that humanity has been preparing for this moment for 2 centuries. Every mountain, every asteroid, every seemingly peaceful colony has been built with one purpose: defending our home." A third figure joined them, a woman whose uniform suggested naval command. "We've studied every species the hegemony has conquered. We've analyzed every battle, every tactic, every weakness in your doctrine. We've prepared for this war longer than you've been alive." Admiral Chen stepped forward again. "You came here to break our spirit with a live massacre. Instead, you've awakened something that should have remained dormant. Humanity's greatest weapon was never our technology, Admiral. It was our ability to unite against a common threat." The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with the reality of his situation. The assault force over New Geneva had been eliminated. Not a single craft remained. The orbital bombardment platforms were being systematically destroyed by weapons that fired from the planet's surface with impossible range and accuracy. But worst of all was the growing realization that this wasn't a desperate last stand. The humans were fighting with the confidence of a people who had planned for exactly this scenario. They weren't surprised. They weren't afraid. They had been waiting. "Emergency jump," Kethvar ordered. "All remaining ships, emergency jump to—" The crushing fist shuddered again, and this time something fundamental broke. The jump drives went offline, disabled by precisely targeted strikes that left the ship intact but trapped. "Jump drives are offline, Admiral. The humans are using some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon that disrupts our faster-than-light systems without destroying the ships themselves." Kethvar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their world. They were fighting to capture his fleet. They wanted prisoners. They wanted intelligence. They wanted to know everything about the hegemony's military capabilities. And they were succeeding. One by one, the surviving hegemony vessels found themselves disabled and boarded by human marines who moved with the efficiency of soldiers who had trained for this exact mission for decades. The boarders didn't kill unless fired upon. They subdued crews with weapons designed to incapacitate rather than destroy. "Admiral," the communications officer whispered, "we're receiving surrender demands from 3 different human commands. They're offering to accept our surrender and guarantee the safety of our crews under what they call the Geneva Conventions." Kethvar's world collapsed around him as he realized the full scope of his miscalculation. The humans hadn't just prepared for war, they had prepared for what came after war. They had rules for treating prisoners. They had established legal frameworks for occupation and reconstruction. They had been planning not just to defend themselves, but to win. The final blow came as Earth's defense grid fell silent, its work complete. Of the 73 capital ships that had arrived to terrorize a primitive world, 14 remained operational. The rest were either destroyed or disabled, their crews facing capture by an enemy they had never bothered to understand. As human ships moved in to secure the wreckage of his fleet, Kethvar understood that the hegemony had awakened something far worse than Earth's military might. They had awakened humanity's unity, the terrible, focused anger of a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for exactly this moment. The live massacre the hegemony had planned would indeed be broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. But it would not show the destruction of Earth's spirit. It would show the moment humanity stopped being patient. The emergency session of the Hegemony High Council convened in the golden spires of Keth-Dara Prime exactly 18 hours after the disaster at Earth. The vast chamber, designed to inspire awe in visiting dignitaries from lesser species, now felt like a tomb. Of the 47 council members present, not one had spoken for the past 7 minutes. Hierarch Supreme Veltar finally broke the silence, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 800 years of unchallenged dominance. Explain to me again how the Third Fleet, our most powerful naval formation, was destroyed by a species we classified as primitive. Admiral Kethvar, survivor of the Earth catastrophe, stood in the center of the chamber. His once proud bearing was broken, his scales dulled by stress and the weight of impossible failure. Around him, holographic displays showed the tactical readouts from the battle, if it could even be called a battle. The humans, they were ready for us, Hierarch. Not just ready, they had been preparing for centuries. Every analysis, every intelligence report we based our plans on was completely wrong. Hierarch Zexthul, military commander of the hegemony's southern sectors, leaned forward. Impossible. Our surveillance confirms that humans have only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 50 years. Their society shows no signs of unified military command. Their planets are divided into competing nation-states that can barely cooperate on trade agreements. That's what they wanted us to see, Kethvar replied, his voice hollow. The political divisions, the seeming lack of coordination, it was all theater. Beneath the surface, they have been building the most sophisticated defensive network in the galaxy. And when we threaten them, the displays around the chamber shifted to show new intelligence. Data purchased at enormous cost from independent traders and spy networks throughout the galaxy. What they revealed made every council member's blood run cold. These images were taken in the past day, Kethvar continued. Look at them carefully. The first display showed the asteroid belt around Earth's star. What had once appeared to be simple mining operations now revealed themselves as massive military installations. Weapons platforms emerged from hollowed-out asteroids like flowers blooming in fast forward. Each one was the size of a hegemony battleship and bristled with enough firepower to level a city. The second display showed Earth's moon. The surface cracked open like an egg, revealing the muzzle of a railgun so large it could have served as a docking port for a space station. Around its perimeter, smaller defensive installations rose from concealed bunkers, creating a spherical shield of overlapping fire zones. The third display was the most disturbing of all. It showed Earth itself, and the energy readings were impossible to ignore. The entire planet was lit up like a weapon. Fusion reactors buried in mountain ranges, magnetic acceleration coils running along tectonic fault lines, orbital elevators that doubled as planetary defense platforms. They turned their entire star system into a fortress, Kethvar said quietly. Not just Earth, every planet, every moon, every significant asteroid. They've been doing it for 2 centuries, hiding their construction behind facades of civilian infrastructure. Hierarch Veltar's 4 eyes narrowed. The economic cost alone would be staggering. How did they fund such a massive undertaking? They didn't fund it, Hierarch. They invested their entire civilization in it. Every human settlement, every industrial facility, every resource extraction operation was designed from the beginning to serve dual purposes. They built a military-industrial complex that spans their entire solar system while making it look like normal colonial expansion. The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. The hegemony had encountered species that had united under external pressure before, but never anything like this. Never a civilization that had spent centuries preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Hierarch Mordak, eldest of the council members, spoke for the first time. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had overseen the conquest of 43 species. What of their fleet actions? Our analysis suggests their naval doctrine is unlike anything in our database. Kethvar activated another set of displays. They fight like a single organism. Every ship, every squadron, every tactical decision is coordinated through quantum communication networks that function in real time across interplanetary distances. They don't have commanding officers in the traditional sense. They have a collective tactical intelligence that processes battlefield information faster than our computers. The displays showed human fleet movements during the battle. Ships appeared to anticipate hegemony maneuvers before they were executed. Formations shifted and adapted with inhuman precision. Weapons fire was coordinated to maximize damage while minimizing waste. But that's not the worst part, Kethvar continued. The worst part is what happened after the battle ended. New images appeared. Footage from the surviving hegemony ships that had been captured intact. Human Marines moved through the corridors with calm efficiency, treating wounded hegemony personnel and securing sensitive areas. They operated with a level of professionalism that spoke of extensive training in ship-to-ship boarding actions. They didn't kill us, Kethvar said, and his voice carried a note of confused terror. They captured us, all of us, 14,000 hegemony personnel, and they captured almost all of them alive. They had medical teams standing by for our physiology. They had holding facilities prepared for our environmental needs. They had legal frameworks ready for processing prisoners of war. Hierarch Zexthul made a sound of disgust. Primitive sentimentality. They lack the will to... No, Kethvar interrupted, which would have meant death under normal circumstances. You don't understand. They didn't capture us out of mercy. They captured us for information. They are systematically extracting every detail about our military capabilities, our fleet dispositions, our technological specifications, and they're doing it with a sophistication that suggests they've been planning interrogation procedures for decades. The chamber erupted in angry voices as the council members grasped the full scope of the disaster. The hegemony's entire strategy relied on overwhelming superior force and the fear it generated. No species had ever successfully resisted their initial assault. Most surrendered after seeing a single world destroyed. But Earth had not just resisted. It had crushed the hegemony's most powerful fleet and captured enough intelligence to potentially compromise their entire military structure. Hierarch Veltar restored order with a gesture. What is the current status of our border fleets? Admiral Kethvar consulted his tactical displays. All outer rim squadrons have been recalled to defensive positions. The 7th Fleet has been repositioned to guard the Keth Dara system. The 12th and 15th Fleets are establishing a defensive perimeter around our core worlds. And the humans? They haven't moved. The silence that followed was deafening. Every council member understood the implication. If the humans had wanted to press their advantage, they could have launched immediate counterattacks while the hegemony's fleets were scattered and demoralized. Instead, they had remained in their system, apparently content to consolidate their victory. Intelligence reports suggest they are broadcasting the battle footage to every civilized world in the galaxy, Kethvar continued. The entire galactic community now knows that the hegemony can be defeated. Our vassal species are already showing signs of unrest. As if summoned by his words, a communications officer entered the chamber with obvious reluctance. Hierarchs, we are receiving reports from across the Empire. The Thraxian sector has declared independence. The mining colonies in the outer spiral are in open revolt. 3 of our tributary species have announced they are severing all ties with the hegemony effective immediately. Hierarch Veltar's ancient features showed the strain of centuries of absolute rule being shattered in a single day. How many ships do we have available for immediate suppression operations? 43% of our total fleet strength is currently combat-ready, Hierarch. But deploying them to suppression duties would leave our core worlds virtually undefended. The strategic situation was becoming clear to every council member. The hegemony faced the choice between maintaining their empire and defending their homeland. They could not do both with their remaining forces. What do we know about human intentions? Hierarch Mordak asked. Have they made any demands? Issued any ultimatums? They have made one official statement, Kethvar replied, activating a communications display. Admiral Chen's image appeared on every major news network in the galaxy simultaneously. The recording played, showing the human admiral who had orchestrated the hegemony's defeat. She spoke with the calm confidence of someone who held all the strategic advantages. To the species of the galaxy, Admiral Chen began, Earth extends an invitation. For too long, the hegemony has maintained order through fear and oppression. Today, that order ends. Any species currently under hegemony rule that wishes to declare independence will find sanctuary and protection under the banner of the Terran Defense Alliance. The council members watched in growing horror as the human continued. We do not seek conquest. We do not desire tribute or vassalage. We offer something the galaxy has not seen for centuries, a choice. Choose freedom and Earth will stand with you. Choose to continue supporting the hegemony's reign of terror, and you will face the consequences of that decision. The recording ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. The humans weren't just offering military protection. They were proposing a complete reorganization of galactic politics. This is worse than rebellion, Hierarch Zexthul said finally. They're building an alternative power structure. They want to replace us. Hierarch Veltar stood slowly, his ancient joints protesting the movement. How many species does our intelligence estimate will accept their offer? The communications officer consulted his datapad with obvious reluctance. Conservative estimates suggest 30% of our tributary species will declare independence within the next standard week. Optimistic projections suggest 60%. The mathematical reality was inescapable. The hegemony's empire was built on the systematic exploitation of hundreds of species across thousands of star systems. If even a significant minority declared independence and received human protection, the economic foundation of hegemony society would collapse. Military options? Veltar asked. Admiral Kethvar shook his head. Limited, Hierarch. We could potentially assemble enough force to retake some of the border systems, but only by stripping defenses from our core worlds. And if the humans choose to intervene... He didn't need to finish the thought. The battle at Earth had proven that human military technology was at least equal to hegemony capabilities, and their tactical coordination was superior. A direct confrontation would likely result in another devastating defeat. Diplomatic options? The humans have not responded to any communication attempts since Admiral Chen's broadcast, Kethvar replied. Our intelligence suggests they are consolidating their position and coordinating with the species that have declared independence from our rule. Hierarch Mordak leaned back in her seat, her expression thoughtful. They are letting us make the first move. They want to see how we will respond to this crisis. And how will we respond? Hierarch Zexthul demanded. Do we negotiate with primitives? Do we allow our empire to dissolve without a fight? Hierarch Veltar looked around the chamber, studying the faces of the beings who had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years. He saw fear there, and uncertainty, but also the stubborn pride that had built the hegemony's empire. We respond as we always have, he said finally. We gather our strength, we identify our enemy's weaknesses, and we strike back. The humans may have won a single battle, but they have not won the war. But even as he spoke the words, Veltar knew they rang hollow. The humans had not just won a battle, they had shattered the fundamental assumption upon which hegemony power rested. They had proven that the Empire's military might could be defeated, and they had done it in front of the entire galaxy. The age of hegemony dominance was ending, whether the High Council acknowledged it or not. The only question now was whether that ending would come through negotiation or through the kind of total war that would leave the galaxy in ruins. As the emergency session continued late into the night, reports continued to arrive from across the Empire. More species declaring independence, more fleets pledging loyalty to the emerging Terran Defense Alliance. More evidence that the humans had not acted alone. They had been coordinating with resistance movements across the galaxy for decades. The hegemony had thought they were crushing a single primitive world. Instead, they had triggered a galactic revolution that had been waiting for exactly this moment to begin. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the TDA warship Indomitable, watching as the last hegemony stronghold in the Outer Rim prepared for siege. 3 months had passed since the failed attack on Earth, and the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Where once the hegemony's iron grip had maintained order through fear, a patchwork of free worlds now flew the banner of the Terran Defense Alliance. Final surrender ultimatum incoming from the planetary governor, reported Lieutenant Commander Kim, the ship's communications officer. Governor Thexdal is requesting terms for the evacuation of hegemony personnel and their families. Santos nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the fortress world of Kethmanor hanging before them like a gray-brown fist. Unlike the early days of the Revolution, when hegemony commanders had fought to the death rather than surrender, recent weeks had seen a wave of negotiated capitulations. The hegemony's remaining leaders were learning that the humans kept their promises about prisoner treatment. "Patch me through to the governor," Santos ordered, "and make sure Admiral Chen is copied on all communications." The main screen shifted to show an elderly hegemony male whose scales showed the distinctive markings of the ruling caste. Governor Thexdal had administered this system for nearly 2 centuries, overseeing the systematic extraction of resources that had fed the hegemony war machine. Now he looked like exactly what he was, a career bureaucrat watching his world collapse. "Captain Santos," the governor began, his translator rendering his words in accented but clear English. "I am prepared to discuss the terms of our surrender, but I must insist on guarantees for the civilian population. My people had no choice in the hegemony's policies." Santos kept her expression neutral. Over the past months, she had conducted dozens of these negotiations, and she had learned to read the subtle signs of genuine remorse versus desperate self-preservation. Governor Thexdal, she decided, fell somewhere in between. "The Terran Defense Alliance honors its commitments, Governor. All civilians who wish to relocate to hegemony core worlds will be provided safe passage. Those who choose to remain under the new planetary government will be protected under galactic law. But I need your military commanders to understand that any resistance at this point will be met with overwhelming force." The governor's relief was visible even across species lines. Understood, Captain. We have seen the reports from other worlds. Your people fight with honor, even against those who showed you none. It was true. The TDA's military doctrine had shocked both allies and enemies with its restraint. Human forces consistently offered quarter, treated prisoners according to strict protocols, and worked to minimize civilian casualties even when such considerations slowed their advance. It was a stark contrast to the hegemony's traditional approach of rule through terror. Governor, I'm authorizing the transfer of our liaison teams to begin the transition process. They'll work with your administrators to ensure essential services continue during the changeover. We've found that cooperation makes everything easier for everyone involved. As the call ended, Santos reflected on how dramatically the war had evolved since Earth's defensive victory. What had begun as humanity's desperate stand had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a revolution conducted with surgical precision and genuine concern for the welfare of conquered populations. "Captain," her tactical officer called out, "we're receiving priority transmission from Admiral Chen." The screen shifted to show the face that had become the symbol of galactic liberation. Admiral Sarah Chen looked older than she had 3 months ago. The stress of coordinating a galaxy-spanning campaign was visible in the lines around her eyes, but her voice carried the same calm authority that had broken the hegemony's first assault. "Maria, excellent work on the Kethmaner negotiations. We're seeing similar surrenders across 17 other systems today. The hegemony's outer perimeter is collapsing faster than our logistics teams can handle." Santos smiled grimly. "It's a good problem to have, Admiral. What's the strategic situation?" Chen's expression grew serious. "Mixed news. The good news is that we now have formal alliance agreements with 67 species and provisional agreements with another 34. The logistics network is functioning beyond our most optimistic projections. The bad news is that Hierarch Veltar is consolidating what remains of the hegemony fleet around their core worlds." A new tactical display appeared, showing the inner regions of what had once been hegemony space. The remaining loyal forces had withdrawn to a cluster of heavily fortified systems surrounding Keth-Dara Prime, the hegemony capital. Intelligence estimates suggested they still commanded over 1,000 major warships, plus countless defensive installations. "They're preparing for a final stand," Chen continued. "Our analysts believe they'd rather fight to extinction than accept the dissolution of their empire. The question is whether we're prepared for that level of casualties." Santos studied the display thoughtfully. The hegemony's core systems were surrounded by layer upon layer of defensive positions built over centuries of conquest. Taking them by force would require massive casualties on both sides, and the human military leadership had made clear that preserving life, even enemy life, remained a strategic priority. "What about the psychological warfare campaign?" Santos asked. Chen's expression brightened slightly. "That's the one piece of genuinely good news. Dr. Yamamoto's team has been broadcasting continuously to the hegemony core worlds, and the effects are starting to show. We're detecting increased civilian unrest, defections among junior military personnel, and signs of strain in their command structure." The psychological warfare campaign had been one of humanity's most innovative tactical developments. Rather than traditional propaganda, Dr. Yamamoto's teams broadcast personal testimonials from freed populations, documentation of improved living conditions on liberated worlds, and detailed analyses of the hegemony's economic unsustainability. They weren't trying to break enemy morale. They were providing information that allowed populations to make informed decisions about their futures. "The key breakthrough came when we started including economic projections," Chen explained. "Most hegemony citizens never understood how completely their society depended on tribute from conquered worlds. When we showed them the mathematical reality of their situation, the effects were immediate." Santos nodded. The hegemony's economy was essentially a pyramid scheme on a galactic scale, requiring constant expansion to maintain the standard of living for their core populations. With their tributary species declaring independence en masse, the foundation of their civilization was crumbling regardless of military action. Admiral, what's the timeline for final operations? That depends on choices the hegemony leadership makes over the next few weeks, Chen replied. Our intelligence suggests growing pressure on Hierarch Veltar to open negotiations. If that happens, we could see a peaceful transition. If not, she didn't need to finish the thought. Both officers understood the implications of a final assault on the hegemony core worlds. The casualties would be staggering, the destruction immense, and the precedent dangerous. The TDA had worked hard to establish principles of proportional response and protection of civilians. A massive final battle could undermine everything they had built. There is one other option, Chen continued, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Our xenopsychology teams have been analyzing hegemony cultural patterns, and they think there might be a way to trigger an internal power struggle within their leadership. Santos raised an eyebrow. Divide and conquer? More sophisticated than that. The hegemony has maintained unity for centuries by directing all aggression outward, toward conquest and expansion. But with their empire collapsing, those internal pressures are building toward a breaking point. Our analysts think we might be able to accelerate that process without additional military action. The strategy made sense from a tactical perspective, but Santos could hear the reluctance in Chen's voice. Manipulating internal politics felt uncomfortably close to the hegemony's own methods of control. What would that look like in practice? Santos asked. Targeted information releases about individual council members' roles in specific atrocities. Evidence of resource hoarding while outer worlds suffered. Documentation of corruption within their command structure. The idea is to let their own people draw conclusions about their leadership's fitness to rule. Santos considered the proposal carefully. It was elegant, potentially effective, and morally ambiguous in exactly the way that made it dangerous. The TDA had built its legitimacy on principles of honest governance and respect for self-determination. Using manipulation tactics, even against an oppressive enemy, could set precedents that would haunt them for generations. Admiral, I understand the strategic value, but I'm concerned about the long-term implications. If we establish that information warfare is acceptable when it serves our purposes, how do we maintain moral authority when others use similar tactics? Chen's smile carried a note of approval. That's exactly the right question to ask, Maria. And it's why the final decision won't be made by military commanders. President Martinez is convening a full session of the TDA Council next week to debate our options. Every member species will have input on how we proceed. It was a perfect example of how the TDA differed from the hegemony. Where the alien empire made decisions through authoritarian decree, the human-led alliance insisted on democratic processes even in the middle of a war. It was inefficient, sometimes frustrating, but it was also what made their cause worth fighting for. In the meantime, Chen continued, continue standard operations in your sector. The more hegemony commanders who choose surrender over destruction, the stronger our position becomes regardless of what happens at the core worlds. As the transmission ended, Santos turned back to the tactical displays, showing Kethmanor's ongoing surrender process. Human diplomatic teams were already coordinating with local populations to establish transitional governance structures. Within weeks, this world would join the growing number of systems that had traded hegemony oppression for TDA protection. But the real victory wasn't military. It was the precedent being established. For the first time in galactic history, a major power was demonstrating that interstellar governance could be based on consent rather than conquest. Every world that chose to join the TDA freely was proof that an alternative to empire was possible. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Kim reported, We're receiving delegations from the Thraxian Council, the Vegan Cooperative, and the Free Mining Guild. They're all requesting formal admission to the TDA. Santos smiled. 3 months ago, those species had been hegemony vassals, their resources extracted to fund further conquest. Today they were independent civilizations choosing their own futures. It was exactly what humanity had hoped to achieve when they first developed their defensive strategy 2 centuries ago. The irony was not lost on her. The hegemony had attacked Earth to demonstrate the price of defying their authority. Instead, they had demonstrated that their authority could be defied successfully. In trying to preserve their empire through intimidation, they had triggered its complete dissolution. "Signal our acceptance of their delegations," Santos ordered, "and prepare a full diplomatic briefing packet. If we're going to build a new galactic order, we need to make sure everyone understands what they're joining." As the Indomitable maintained its position over Kethmanor, Santos reflected on the transformation taking place across the galaxy. The Age of Empire was ending, not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that better alternatives were possible. The hegemony had thought they were destroying Earth's spirit with a live massacre. Instead, they had awakened humanity's greatest strength, the ability to inspire others to choose freedom over security, cooperation over submission. The final chapters of this war would be written in the coming weeks, but the ultimate outcome was no longer in doubt. The galaxy was choosing a new path, and humanity had shown them the way forward. The question now was not whether the hegemony would fall, but what would rise to take its place. And that answer was already becoming clear in the growing chorus of worlds choosing hope over fear, cooperation over domination, and freedom over the false security of empire. The hegemony's greatest mistake had been believing that peace was weakness. They were learning too late that peace was humanity's greatest strength.